this is an old versus new pulp horror, pulp, just general pulp. So, what I'm going to do is, there's two from the late 80s, early 90s, and then there's two modern films. For the modern films, I'm not going to do any spoilers. For the older films, you should have seen them by now, but I'm going to try not to spoil anything horribly either. So it's going to be a general video, but I'm trying to avoid being too spoilery with them. It's much more of a general thing of, this is what these films are, and the idea is the difference in pulp and pulp horror over time, basically. So the old films are Tremors and Night of the Creeps. And the newer films are Halloween Kills and Cop Shop. So these are all pulp. These are all glorious pulp. But they're very different types of glorious pulp. The older films are more knowingly pulpy. They're 80s or 80s influenced films. The newer films are very influenced by that kind of era, but have a kind of pretentious existential slant to them that are still enjoyable. Because I'm going to say right now, I liked Halloween Kills, even though a lot of people didn't. But I'll get to that. I'm going to start with Tremors and Night of the Creeps. Now, the 80s had this kind of thing of a lack of self-seriousness, really, in a lot of the films. Because it came from the 70s. The 70s were the great era of, like, the Cronenberg early films. You had the George Romero, like, zombie films and weird films. You had a whole bunch of serious films and weird experimental films and deranged films. So when it was horror, even the kind of popular ones, they'd all had these weird ideas floating through them, and they were all very political. And because of a very political time and people were very angry, that influenced the films. So even if you had like films that were just obviously pulpy cannibal movies, you'd have some weird political subtext to it. You know, if you were doing a vampire movie, there would always be weird, like, counterculture back characters there in there as well, looking at youth culture versus this old stodgy vampire. There's always going to be something interesting and weird, and so you can look back in those films and see some of the cultural tensions going through the period, because they were about that. There was always some subtext to it. And the best ones, like the Cronenberg stuff, and, and Dawn of the Dead, stuff like that, had real meaning to them, had a real bite to them. The 80s, when following Star Wars and Spielberg's Jaws in the 70s, where it became a case of there were much more popular films, meant in the 80s, you might have some subtext, but it was more about the roller coaster ride elements to it, rather than, anything in the background that was interesting. So even though some of the Jaws actually had a lot of good stuff about Amity and all the political shenanigans going on, by the 80s, a lot of the time it was just pure, like there would be some of the Poltergeist which had something about, capitalism going amok, but it wasn't that serious. It was just in there to give a bit of grounding to all the over-the-top horror stuff. You never felt you were taken seriously. Something like Evil Dead had no political interests. Stuff like The Omen, nothing. They were just... They did all these things about, it's all about power, just about kid killing people, really. So that was the thing. That's where it was going. It was going to these packaged films. And even through that, you got stuff like Nightmare on Elm Street series, which started off as a good film and then became like packaged into this other thing. Friday the 13th series. So horror became very packaged. So the only way to really give it some charm was really doing monster movies, I think. I think a lot of the monster movies in the 80s were a lot more fun than the slasher stuff. The slasher stuff got old really fast for me. I was not really into them. I mean, I adore Halloween, and I like Halloween 3, but the other Halloweens are garbage. The Friday the 13th never did anything for me. I enjoy it a bit later, but they're not really my thing. Nightmare on Elm Street, same thing. There's some enjoyable stuff, but they're not really my thing, ultimately. But I like monster movies. Monster movies are more fun. You can actually get more character in monster movies. And that's what Tremors did. Tremors was a throwback. It was 80s in a sense that because you show mandates to have like constant things happen, this film had that, but a lot of character stuff as well. There's a throwback towards like the 50s and 60s and early 70s horror where you actually had like characters in a situation and you're following the characters rather than special effects. There are special effects going on, but it's not like the effects build and build towards being something that is the main show. I mean, look at Evil Dead. Evil Dead is brilliant, but the finale is not about the characters. The finale is about the amazing camera moving special effects. You know, a lot of horror movies are like that. I mean, and the ones that weren't, the ones were about character and effects, like The Thing, were misunderstood. So Tremors was like an old-fashioned kickback where there were monsters, but they weren't really disturbing. They were underground monsters, and there's this old, back of nowhere community that's attacked by them, and they have to come together and survive. And it's the charm of characterization over lots and lots of action. Because even when action happens, it's all tied to character. And it's wonderful to watch because you're always invested in the characters. You're always invested in what's happening. Who are they? What are they? What do they want in this situation? And they've always, every character is a quirk. So even though you're not going to find out that much depth about a lot of them, you're going to get enough so you like them. So when someone dies, it actually means something to you. And there's some terrific dialogue. I mean, it stars Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward. There's these two handymen in the middle of nowhere who feel that they're going nowhere. And they're trying to get out of town because they think they have to at least start making an effort. Unfortunately, that's when the worms attack and they cut off and they have to work the community to try and escape this area before it goes to hell. And you have Michael Gross as Burt Gummer, who's this gun nut who's out here because he thinks the world's going to end. And so he's got all the weapons to fight the grab boys, which is what they call them. And it's a really wonderful thing. There's a scientist who's out there, a student scientist who's trying to help them figure it out and try to survive as well with them. And she starts a romance with Kevin Bacon eventually. But it's very, very under the surface for most of the film because they've got monsters to deal with, and it's about the characterizations, interactions more than let's have a forced romance. That's what's good about the film is it knows what the situation is. It doesn't force anything that you wouldn't be dealing with anyway. And you have lots of other little characters like the kid who's very annoying. You've got the owner of the shop who's always conning people, played by Victor Wong, who you'll notice from Big Trouble in Little China. There's lots of these little characters throughout the film, and it all really works. It's just so wonderful. And it builds and builds, so each suspense beat leads to the next bit, And the villains always figure out what the heroes are doing, so they have to adapt and adapt and adapt. So the actual construction's terrific, the dialogue's terrific, because the characters can be smart one minute and stupid the next, but it's all fun characters. Like, they're smart because they observe things, but they still have some basic assumptions that are wrong. And they're fun with that in the film, but also the characters learn from their mistakes as they go on. And it's like, oh, I got that wrong, I need to figure this out. So the characters grow on you and start to become people you like to follow. And it's a really well made film. It's just a wonderfully put together film. That and Arachnophobia was also released the same year. They're so similar that I won't bother covering Arachnophobia. That was another one, Frank Marsh directed, with starring Jeff Daniels. And that was with spiders, and it was also a very good film. It was a throwback. There were throwbacks to the older type of films that were character based, not gore. So that was an 80s film that really worked, and it was away from the slasher things. And it was almost like a lot of the stuff that were done here, you could see that they started to push towards stuff like Jurassic Park and the way the 90s were going to go. I mean, Tremors didn't do well, but its template pretty much became 90s horror action movie for a while. With monster movies, it felt like they were very much following the Tremors pattern after that. Just because it was more character based and less gore based, and it was just, I mean, none of them were as good as Tremors, but they were definitely following that template. It was like, oh, that's a good way to do these movies. The other one I'm going to talk about the 80s throwback was Night of the Creeps, which is kind of a way not to do it, even though it's an enjoyable film. It's kind of like what Tremors did, but it was made earlier, they had less money, and the characterization was way more smart ass, and the plot development wasn't as good. So it became a film that was enjoyable, but it should have been a lot better. So it's about these worms, another film with worms, that come down from space. They're infectious, they go into people's brains and infect them and turn into these. So the person's dead, but the body's still moving. And they grow inside the brains and spread into more of them each time. So they arrived in the 50s. They got they caught the infection and they just hid it away in this cryogenic tube. Unfortunately, these two stupid college kids who are heroes accidentally break into the lab in a college prank and accidentally let loose the infected person, and all hell breaks loose. You know, they escape, they start attacking people, and it takes most of the movie to figure out what the problem is. This is why is different from Tremors in a bad way, because in Tremors they figure it out pretty fast and start dealing with problems. In this one, no one figures it out until almost the last third of the movie. And most of the trailer is the last third of the movie. They're trying to sell you a movie that only exists for like 15 minutes. The rest of the movie is this college comedy that's very much based on all these comedies that you were seeing at the time. And they were pretty much selling it as it's a college comedy, but about horror at the end. And it's kind of unsatisfying in that way. But it's still a fandom film. It's a fan film because all the characters are named after horror directors like Cronenberg. The leading lady's called something Cronenberg, and every character is named after a horror director, which is fine for this film because it is silly and it shows an affection for the genre, but it gets grating after a while. At a certain point, it's like, please stop. We get that you like these movies, but you have to stop now, and it never stops. It just never does. And that's the problem. The best thing it's got going for it is Tom Atkins. That's what one thing these kind of throwback movies do have from the 80s is they have reliable B-movie actors. I mean, Tom Atkins was in a lot of John Carpenter movies, and you get the feeling that this film was very influenced by John Carpenter and his atmospheric stuff, and they're hoping to be John Carpenter in a way while being also John Hughes. And they're not quite good enough either. But they had Tom Atkins, this burnt out detective, and he's a lot of fun. You know, because he's suicidal and he's depressed and all hell's breaking loose around him, so he has to keep on going and fight all these monsters. And that really works. But you wish the whole movie was about him because we wouldn't have to avoid all these college pranks of these characters who are not great characters. They're okay, but they're not great. Like, none of the lead characters are great. They're enjoyable enough for what they are, but they're not amazingly well acted or amazingly well written. It's just like, they're enjoyable as they are, but they're not like specific enough to really get your attention. And the story just meanders on for ages before it gets to the blooming point. And it's like, we know what's going on. Can you get to the point now so we can get interesting stuff? Instead, they just slow down, have an odd set piece here or there. And basically, the whole thing is about killing off these characters I've introduced you to. And that's basically what they've got going for the film. That's what the film's about, almost. It's like, we introduce characters, then we kill them. Which is what most monster movies do. But something like Tremors is much more clever about it, because they don't kill everyone off. In Night of the Creeps, a lot of people die. In a gratuitous way that it's like, it becomes unsatisfying because it's like, is that all you've got? You don't have any cleverness to it. So that's the kind of downside of that kind of 80s throwback thing. But it's still a really enjoyable film. I mean, Fred Decker, who wrote it, also made The Monster Squad just after this. It's a much better film. It's like much better paced out, and it works. At that point, it was a friend of Shane Black, and Shane Black helped him write Monster Squad. Monster Squad's a much better written film, much better directed film. Then he made RoboCop 3, which is a disaster for everybody, and it ruined his career. But this is he tells a first-time director's film. But there's a lot of films like that in the 80s, like House and stuff like that are all kind of not too serious. Some of the Tremors was kind of like oh, this is how you can actually do it and make it good. Well, a lot of the 80s stuff was much more like Night of the Creeps, where there are good bits in it, but it's not quite as good as it thinks it is. Actually, you're letting away with a lot just because you're charmed by its appreciation for some stuff you like. That's the kind of thing this film has. But it's still worth a look. It's just not great. Now we go to modern day. Now, modern in horror, we've moved a lot from the 80s and the 90s. Because as I said, in the 60s and 70s, it was much more character based and then political based. 80s became special effects fests. And there's a. And the slasher movies didn't have that many good characters. Every so often you get a good character actor you could invest in. But a lot of the time, you were reliant on what the actor could bring to you. Because you haven't really written anything that good. 90s it became a different thing. It was based on the Tremors model of. It was a PG-13 monster movie. Very much in the Amblin mode. Because the most successful version was Jurassic Park. And everyone was copying that mode where it was like nobody would die in the most horrible way ever, but it would be more enjoyable characters. The characters were brought up a lot more, even if they were very stock. They were generally better written and more enjoyable to watch. Just even if the film itself wasn't great, even if the film didn't have any real point to it, they would be a bit more enjoyable than a lot of the 80s slasher movies in character level. The 80s slasher movies were much more fun to watch for the kills, but it's like you can trade. It's like 90s stuff, better characters, 80s stuff, better kills, better effects. 90s stuff was a lot of CGI stuff, and it got kind of bland in a lot of ways. I mean, the problem with 90s stuff, it got blanded out a lot because it followed a model and caused studios to bland stuff out, and unless there's someone innovating it as it goes. So you got a lot of monster movies that are relic and stuff in the 90s. And it all kind of died out. And you had the big monster stuff like the Godzilla American version, which was like the thing that killed it stone dead. Killed everything stone dead. In the 2000s, like, effects movies went towards more epic, like Lord of the Rings and things. So horror kind of died and then went back to the quiet stuff like the Shyamalan stuff. They kind of started rebuilding as a variety of quiet movies and Scream rip-offs, which were kind of slasher but no slasher. So they've kind of moved on, but I much prefer the kind of ghostly stuff. This kind of Scream generation stuff doesn't really interest me because I'm much more from the older generation. I just think some of them are fine, but who cares? So you've seen a lot of horror movies, who cares? So, I mean, horror's kind of come and gone. It's kind of, there's been peaks and troughs. Some years you get really good stuff, and there's other years you don't. And you just hope for the best. Is the best way to put it. And one of the interesting things is a lot of thrillers have used the horror techniques because they're influenced by the Coen brothers and film noir. So, from the 80s onwards, and this has been reliable, is like sci-fi movies like Terminator use a lot of horror tropes. Like Near Dark, Bigelow film, it's a horror film. We use a lot of Western tropes. So these other movies would use elements of horror but not be fully horror. And you've stuff like Roadkill does this. And it's just been a quiet subgenre that's gone through for years. Something I've really enjoyed is when you kind of go to you add horror to something else, but it's not pure horror, but it switches with genres. So we have a very different field for pulp in the 2000s and the 2020s. So these are two new films that have come out in the past few weeks that are worthy of your watching, which is Halloween Kills and Cop Shop. The Cop Shop is the one that's the genre bending one, but it's still really a horror movie in lots of ways. But it's got guns and stuff, but it's using the horror movie thematics. And then Halloween Kills is basically a slasher movie with art house pretensions, but it's also a lot of kills in it. So it's an interesting way that everything's kind of shifted. It's gone from like the 80s where this was mindless stuff, and now we're going back towards the 70s stuff. But like the 70s stuff, sometimes it's not as artful as you'd hope it would be, but it's kind of interesting. I like both Cop Shop and Halloween Kills. I preferred Halloween Kills, actually. I know most people seem to like Cop Shop. Cop Shop, I thought, had lots of good stuff, but also thought it kind of dragged at times. It could have lost 15 minutes somewhere and gotten to the point quicker. I just think it was too slow. But it was well done. Halloween Kills is also a film that could have lost 15 minutes. But it was better directed, I think, and it had more stuff going on in its head. But they're both interesting genre movies, but they are genre movies. No matter how much pretense they've got for anything else, they are genre movies. So Halloween Kills is a follow-up to Halloween, which is a follow-up to Halloween. Confusing, because it's in 2000 and something, 17, 18, David Gordon Green and Danny McBride rebooted Halloween with a sequel that ignored all the sequels and just was a sequel to the original Halloween. It was highly acclaimed. Everyone loved it. Everyone said, "Oh, this is the most amazing thing." And I saw it and it was like, "That's pretty good." It's like, it's fine. It's not the most amazing thing. I liked seeing Jamie Lee Curtis back as Laurie. That was good. She was a survival nut. That worked quite nicely. But it wasn't the most amazing film. It was overhyped. Really. It really was. It was like, because there have been so many bad Halloween sequels, this one came out and it was like, "Oh, that's the most amazing thing ever." And it's like, really? Have you seen any horror movies? This is good, but it's not great. And now, this happens a lot when a film gets overpraised by everybody. They do a second one. The second one's absolutely butchered because it's like, they're seeing the film everyone else that other people saw for the first time round. And they're like, why am I not surprised and enjoying this as much? It's like, because they're from a similar quality anyway. It's like, the films haven't changed. It's just your appreciation because you've realised you maybe fell in love too much the first time round and didn't notice all its flaws. And that's what I think was great with Halloween. Because the first one got overpraised and this one's getting over-criticised. But it is pretentious. It is this idea of evil has come to Haddonfield again. And Michael's almost like a metaphor for all the evil. So his mere presence causing people to have a fit. Because it's set just after the other film. Pretty much both are set in the same night. Jamie Lee Curtis and her family go to the hospital because she's been injured in the first films, or the first reboot films end fight. So they're morphined out their heads for the first half of the film. Michael's escaped and he's going around still killing people. People now know he's alive. We're getting some of the characters from the original film coming back to kill him because they've all been having grudges for 30 years because of what he did. And it's sort of like the infection of evil and the infection of violence because of what's for violence in the past. And it's an interesting theme, and they show how it gets more and more out of control, how someone ends up dying because of the mob. It's a very obvious thing that's going back to the 30s horror with the mob and the Frankenstein movies. Very obvious. Well done though. It's really well done. It just shows you the kind of mania that takes over and the kind of sickness that takes over. But it's well done. But then the film has to go further and say, as Michael's as this infection is almost supernatural, he's something else, and it's like, you've shot it well and it's directed well, but you can push it. But I can enjoy it as a kind of horror movie cliche thing. A lot of people couldn't. A lot of people were like, no, this is too far. And also I think a lot of people wanted a simple slasher movie, not a social commentary about mobs and how we're all horrible people and how good people turn into animals overnight just because of a trauma. I thought that was a reasonable idea to do. I liked the idea. But sometimes it's done better than others. And it is a film you feel like it does take its while to get started. They are setting people up to die. And a lot of the kills are good and inventive, and you get to let the characters probably die. So it is a slasher movie, but it is very brutal. But it also is pushing its metaphor too much. Which a lot of horror movies do. A lot of good horror movies do that. That's part of the enjoyment of the genre sometimes, is like a director overreach, and that's why I enjoyed this film. Didn't love it, but enjoyed it because, yeah, there's some overreach, but there's lots of nicely done sequences. And it's just like an interesting side taking a character because you know that they're coming back. They're going to start shooting Halloween Ends pretty soon, which will end the whole cycle for now, and that'll probably much more like a typical sequel where they're finally facing down against Michael. Apparently takes place 2 years after this one, and it's the aftermath of all the trauma from this one because a lot of people die in this one. Lots and lots of people die. You know, lots of people you didn't expect to die. And it's really, and they die in brutal ways and die in horrible ways, and it's kind of enjoyable actually to see some people that, like, it's how brutal the death count is in this one is pretty astonishing. So I really enjoyed it, but it is a kind of thing of how kind of nihilism can affect horror, but it's always come to that. It's always been that element in horror that can go towards nihilism quite easily. And it's kind of almost necessary at times. You have to be really nihilistic before you can bring back the humanity and other stuff. I think it's just part of horror. And I just liked this film, even though it was very flawed. You can like flawed stuff. And the thing is, this one does is, like, I had a complaint is, all the characters act stupidly. And it's like, it's a horror movie. Also, the way things are going nowadays, people are so narcissistic about how they would behave in any situation. How they'd be purely logical. And it's like, really? You'd be an idiot? Probably, just like most characters. And a lot of people can't enjoy horror movies now because it's like, oh, this character did something stupid. I would never do that. You're like, you probably would. But it's just this ego and narcissism of, oh, I would be better than all these characters. I would not do that. And it's like, it's something that's infecting filmmaking. And action movies the same way. And a lot of dramas. Why do you do that? I would never do that. Suddenly the film's rubbish because of that. And it's like, no, it's a character doing something. That's it. You can like it or not, but it doesn't mean anything, and you're not a genius. So that's something that really bugs me. We've seen a lot of this in reviews of Halloween Kills. It's like, I would never do that. You're like, these are people out of their minds and with fear. You know, they do, the whole point of the film is they do stupid stuff because they're out of their minds in fear, and they're reacting badly. That's the theme of the story. And then you're criticising it for people doing something they're very telling you that's the theme of the story. It's like, really? You're going to be a smart ass with this. So that's a little bugbear. But it's happening a lot in films. People just don't accept characters making mistakes now, and it's like, that's what's good about films. You actually have characters make mistakes. That's what's fun. Flawed characters are fun. These perfect paragons are boring. Perfect paragons a lot of people seem to want in films are boring. Little rant over. Now Cop Shop. Now, Cop Shop is the other type of film, the horror film, where it's like, it looks like a thriller, but it's really a horror film. It's kind of like Blood Simple in the sense that, yeah, it starts out as a noir thing with assassination and things, but it actually turns into horror logic, where they're stuck in this location for most of the film. I mean, basically, Frank Grillo plays this guy who intensely gets arrested because he knows pitmen are after him and he's wanting to get arrested, so they'll kill time so the cops can come and save him. Because all the feds come and save him. Now the people after him are much cleverer than that. They've paid off a lot of other people, and he's just trying to survive like an animal. And then Gerard Butler takes gets arrested so he can get into the jail as well and take out Frank Grillo. The cops stop that, but someone else comes in. It's this nightmare logic of where the cops start taken out one by one, and these two are going to face off at some point, and no one's quite who they seem. It's just a nightmare logic. You're like the character of this young woman she was in the military. She's now a cop. She's dealing with a lot of idiots who aren't as good at their job as she is, and she just has to deal with them. And now she's suddenly realising there's something amiss with these two guys. Something she's not seen that's really important for her survival, so she's trying to work out what it is. And Frank Grillo's playing the kind of guy who's hellish under pressure. He's just trying to survive, and Gerard Butler's the cool killer. But you find out more about them and they're not quite who they seem. and it's pretty clever how some of the things work. Clever in a pulp way. I mean, this is still a pulp idea. No one would do this. The thing that they set up at the beginning with they're both in the jail cell to commit a murder. It's like, how do they escape? How does Butler escape after doing the killing? That doesn't make sense. Stuff like that. There are massive plot holes that don't matter because you're in the nightmare logic of the film. Doesn't ultimately matter. It's just that how the film keeps going and going and going. And it's just a very enjoyable film, but it's too long. There's lots of subplots that are built up and they go and they're developed, but sometimes you think you kind of lost a step here there, but I've still got it. And you've got some more momentum and I've been leaner. It just needs some more leanness to it. And it is a film where there are some plot holes you think, okay, if you really looked into this doesn't make sense, but I'll allow it because I like the logical nightmare feeling of it. And it's also good that everybody gets injured in horrible ways. Like, nobody escapes brutality in this film. Everybody gets... bodies are pummeled to hell in the most brutal ways in this film. And it is an unapologetic B-movie, but it is a horror movie posing as a thriller. Really. So it's very, very enjoyable. But it's too long. It really is too long. And I kind of liked the kind of lean pretensions and brutality of Halloween Kills more than this. Because I just felt sometimes they were winding around so much to get from A to B, and it felt sometimes a bit tiring just because, like, you have done this in half the time. Get to the point, please. There's that element of it. These feel like it's a 90-minute film in the body of an hour 45. And if it lost those 15 minutes, it would have been a much stronger, leaner, better. It was just a much more brutal film. You'd have made the points quicker. It would just have felt like a nightmare logic. And this, it gave itself too much time to have breathers in a way that didn't help the film. But it's still an interesting example. But it's one of the examples of both these films is these are 90-minute films that are too long. They've been extended a little beyond their natural size. Because Tremors felt exactly the right length. Night of the Creeps felt too long as well. But a lot of genre films do feel too long. But nowadays they all feel too long. It really is a problem as they need some leanness brought back to genre filmmaking. I mean, the same thing happened with Old, which I covered a few weeks ago. That's another one that should have been a little shorter. It needed leanness. But I hope you enjoyed this video anyway. But the changes in horror and pulp and subtle horror and more genre-bending horror, I hope it interested you. I mean, it is a kind of weird linkage of all these kind of films I wanted to talk about, but I thought it was worth trying. So I'll see you later. Right, bye for now.